On February 1st, 2022, Crabber went to sleep and never woke up. Hey, I'm Jake, and welcome back to part 2 of my Crabber Retrospective. In this episode, I'm going to talk about how and why Crabber ended, and you can stop DMing me on Twitter. Thank you. So in late January, a new wave of people had joined the site, and this time, rather than fight to keep things functional like I had in the past, I let things run their course until ultimately, I decided I'd rather take Crabber offline than have it continue to exist, slow and barely functional. At first, this was just meant to be a temporary measure, so I could take a break and fix things at my own pace. But after months of chaos, that break lifted such a weight off my shoulders that I realized the best thing for my health would be to make it permanent. And thus, Crabber ended. So why was Crabber not prepared? Well, the wave that, for lack of a better word, killed Crabber was not the first. It was the last of many, and in the past I had tried everything I could to keep the website functional. Here are the problems that ultimately made it a losing game. So the first thing is a shaky foundation. In technology, there's a thing called a stack, and particularly in web, this refers to the technologies that make up your website servers. So you've got the database, you've got the framework that you've written your website in, you've got the server itself that's actually handling connections, and so on and so forth. So Crabber's stack was picked from the beginning to be quick and easy to develop for, not maintainable or fast. Because you have to remember this was just a weekend project, and so the whole idea was make it as quickly as possible and don't worry about how it works or best practices or anything like that. This led to a lot of shortcuts taken and sloppy programming. It's not that I couldn't have made a better website, it's just there was no reason to. I never expected more than a couple dozen users to show up, not to mention it was never meant to live more than a couple weeks anyway. So there was no reason to pick something more sustainable because it just simply wasn't necessary at the time. So there were attempts to transition over these technologies to ones that would be more sustainable, but ultimately most of these efforts just ended up falling flat. So some of the things that we tried were, we started using a CDN, which is a content delivery network for the images and other static resources. This pushed the loading of those elements over to other servers so that the Crabber servers could focus simply on serving Crabber itself and not all the media associated with it. We swapped out the database from SQLite to MySQL. Admittedly not the best choice in light of other databases like Postgres, but ultimately MySQL was the most compatible with what we had, and with the limited dev time, it made the most sense to pick that option. The problem with SQLite was that it's a local database stored in one single file, whereas something like MySQL is a server in and of itself. So with SQLite, you could only have one connection to that database at any given point, meaning you could only have one instance of a server running. With MySQL, we could have had multiple servers dealing with different users and connections, all calling back to a database server that could handle all those connections at the same time. This would have allowed us to have multiple servers running in parallel, which would have been greatly beneficial, and a lot cheaper than just paying for one big, powerful server to handle everything. So we did end up finishing these changes, and it felt like we were ready to transition Crabber itself onto this new stack. Unfortunately, the transition did not go smoothly. Normally what you would do is you would spin up new servers separate from the ones that are currently hosting the website, and on those ones install the new technologies, and then over time transition users from the old servers to the new servers. That way you have time to fix things as they pop up. But because Crabber was funded entirely out of my own pocket, I didn't have the money to afford these new servers, so I had to go with the less desirable solution of simply picking a time, shutting down Crabber, working as hard as I can to migrate everything manually, and then bringing everything back online so that users could continue using the site as soon as possible. But as you might have guessed, a number of problems occurred as a result of this. I spent 2 days working overtime to get them fixed, but ultimately, I decided a rollback was the best thing for the community at that point. I had to abandon the work I had done and just bring back the old servers. So in short, the interest in Crabber far exceeded any of my expectations, and as such was met with code and servers that weren't ready, and not enough developers or funds to fix it. So the next question would be, why didn't those resources exist? Why didn't you have more developers? Why didn't you have more funds? And the reality is, despite all of those challenges, I could have adapted and kept the website going. But I didn't, because I felt that the actions necessary to do so would have betrayed Crabber's identity. And that may sound a little contrived, but just bear with me for a second. When people talk about Crabber's demise online, the discussions all share the same assumption that leads them to the wrong conclusion. They all try to talk about Crabber like it was a startup, a business. They assume that A, its ultimate goal was indefinite growth, and B, it ran out of money because it didn't have enough traffic. Crabber was not a startup. It didn't have employees, it didn't solicit investors, it didn't advertise to gain new users. I mean, I even closed registration on multiple occasions to kill growth. People kept telling me that I should be running ads and making some money, but that wasn't the point. Monetization would have solved Crabber's problems in the short term, but it was fundamentally incompatible with Crabber's goals. We've seen what monetization leads to. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, sites that sell your data and constantly degrade the user experience, because how much you're enjoying the site has very little relevance to their interests. I think optimizing for revenue and fun simultaneously is inherently unsustainable and will always eventually bias towards the former. Every startup likes to think that they're the exception to this, but eventually you realize don't be evil isn't exactly compatible with your business model and you drop it from your code of conduct. Sorry, this is getting a little ranty. The short answer is that I knew that I'm not the exception, and Crabber had to be short-lived in order to maintain its values. Could it have lived a little longer? Yeah, probably. But I don't know. I think you should always leave people wanting more rather than feeling like they've had too much. People are always asking me, oh, have you heard about this? What about this technology? This one probably could have solved your problems. I got a lot of ideas. Some common ones are like federated networks, Web 3.0, that kind of stuff. I've got a lot of thoughts on these proposed solutions, but this video is already getting kind of long, so I think I'm going to save it for the next one. In the next video, I'm going to talk about more of the positive things, what went right with Crabber, why people liked it so much, that kind of stuff. And I think that'll provide better context for why I don't think those technologies are the answer. But anyway, I'll talk about that later. Well, hey, thanks again for listening. This video was a little bit harder to make just because I could talk about this literally for hours, and so condensing my thoughts into this short amount of time is challenging. But I appreciate you sticking around to the end, and I'll see you in the next one.